you hear me? I can hear you. Okay. How's this? Yeah, that's good that it's better because there's not a lot of control that I have at this end. Okay, here I am. Here I go. All right, bye-bye.
Welcome, everyone. I would now like to call the June 4th, 2024 Longmont City Council Study Session to order. The live stream of this meeting can be viewed at the city's YouTube channel. It can also be viewed at the longmontpublicmedia.org/watch or on Comcast channels 8 or 880. May we have the roll call, please, Dawn?
Absolutely. Mayor Peck.
Here.
Councilmember Christ.
Here.
Councilmember Doggle-Faring.
Here.
Councilmember Martin.
Here.
Councilmember McCoy is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez also absent at the moment. Councilmember Yarborough.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Anyone wishing to speak during public invited to be heard will need to add his or her name to the list outside the council chambers. Only those on the list will be invited to speak during public invited to be heard. Do we have any motions to direct the city manager to add agenda items to future agendas from council? Seeing no one, I would like to make a statement here. Okay, I'm going to be out starting this Friday of June 7th until Sunday, June 16th. Mayor Pro Tem Susie Hidalgo-Faring will be my backup. However, if for some reason Mayor Pro Tem is not available, I would like to move that Councilor Aaron Rodriguez be her backup. Can I have a second for that?
Second,
yeah.
Okay.
Third, fourth. Yes.
So it's been seconded by Councilor Christ. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, let's vote.
We could just do a hand vote, Mayor?
Sure. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. All those opposed? Seeing no one, this passed unanimously. Thank you. We are now at public invited to be heard. The first one on this list is Greg Morrissey.
There we go. Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm Greg Morrissey, 1648 Harvard Street, Longmont, and I come to the council tonight for a request. I don't know who runs this, but I'd like to see some changes in the traffic lights. I'm on 1648 Harvard Street and pretty close to that intersection of 17th and Harvard Street. To turn left onto Harvard Street, you never get the green arrow to turn. It's always flashing amber. And with the amount of traffic coming now, I'd like to have that changed to have that if you pull up there, the sensor is put on so the green arrow comes on, you can turn left just to make it safe. If you want to go south on Harvard or north on Harvard, because there's so much traffic coming, and a lot of the traffic I see comes from, I'm sure it's Boulder going through the place, and they're just in a hurry. Boom, 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 they're zooming. So just a request. I don't know if the city can do that or the city can contact the people who run that controller and get it changed.
We'll have somebody get in touch with you, Greg.
Okay, cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Lance Whitaker.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council.
Lance, would you turn on your microphone, please? Uh-oh.
Button.
There you go.
There we go. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Lance Whitaker, 1750 Collier Street, Longmont, Colorado. I've been a resident of Longmont for 44 years now. Today is National Hug Your Cat Day. I would watch out for that one because cats normally don't like to be hugged. It is also National Safety Day, so at least wear safety glasses. Today is also National Clean Beauty Day. As the attorney and the
City manager.
A city manager will tell you the best beauty comes from inside. Today is also National May Day, National Cheese Day, and National Cognac Day. Take it easy today because tomorrow's National Moonshine Day. So take it easy on the cognac today. Today I do have a problem. I did get one of those smart meters last week for National Hamburger Day, and that's why I didn't show up, because I was sort of angry with the city about what was left behind. While I did get a new meter, I do not have any transparency on that meter. I cannot tell how many gallons I'm using. Normally I like to put 50 gallons of water on my front yard. I can't tell when I'm at that $50 anymore. It doesn't tell me how many gallons I'm using. So I find a problem with that. And then of all the holes that they left behind, because when they removed the meter, they left the wire that ran through my house. So now I have to pay someone to fix all those holes up and to take that pipe out. So it did actually cost me quite a bit of money to switch over to the wireless meter. Today you guys are going to talk about meth. I would advise you not to test your buses, because we wouldn't have public transportation if you test your buses. In cannabis and auto crashes, the numbers are really not there, but that's a different thing. And then I'd like to let you all know that the devil got arrested today. He got arrested for possession. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Lance. Steve Altschuler.
Good evening. Steve Altschuler, 1555 Taylor Drive. And I may have missed a week or two and some things I wasn't aware of. I had thought that the city council was talking about having a 4th of July parade, and then I found out that that is not going to happen. And I know you're having a festival, and thank goodness for the Kiwanis Club with having fireworks, or maybe there's food trucks with the fireworks, whatever. There's a whole big event going on. But I just want to say that I really do miss having 4th of July parades. I don't know what the cost was. I don't know all the particulars, but the city council authorized $10,000 for Pride Month or for June 19th, which is a celebration for a small minority of the public. The 4th of July should be a celebration for everybody in Longmont. So hopefully maybe next year you can reconsider and see about having a whole parade up and down Main Street like used to happen for years before COVID. Then I'd also like to talk about low-income / subsidized housing, which I know is a pet project for many on the council. I think there's plenty of apartment buildings already, because from what I've heard, there are hundreds of vacancies. There are still more units going up. There's still more talk of rezoning land and building more 3-story buildings everywhere. And I think this is misguided. When I first moved to Colorado 30 years ago, the first place I bought was an apartment building that had been converted into condos. If you really want to help low-income people get ahead in life, help give them an avenue to get out of being perpetual renters. If you took some of these apartment buildings and made 1-bedroom condos, that are probably renting for $1,500 to $2,000 anyway, and if people could get into something inexpensive and start getting into the real estate market, their equity can start increasing with inflation. So instead of having people that rent for 60 years, you can start giving them an avenue to start helping themselves. And the other thing I wanted to say is, again, with the lower income people, if you really want to help them, the subsidy should be for a limited number of years. And I would be in favor of granting them or helping them, whatever, take free classes at Front Range so they can help themselves. So again, you say that you want to help all these low-income people. Just giving them a little less for rent doesn't help them a lot. It keeps them where they are. And I would like to see the city council look into ways to actually really help people rather than perpetuate the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Strider Benston.
Strider Benston, 951 17th Street. Agreed with at least half of what Steve said this time. But the real thing is the developers and the extreme wealth gap in this country, which is 10 times worse than it was 40 years ago. And people used to, the rich people would have one super mansion and maybe 2 or 3 other mansions. Now they have 5 or 6 or 8, and that's part of the game. And not the Shelby County decision, but the one before that, that said the ultra-rich can pay any politician secret money, and we can't find out who's giving it or how much. Anyway, I discovered at home in my library the Schumacher lectures in 1980, and Fritjof Capra wrote the Buddhist Physics, and I met him about that time 2 years later when he came out with the Turning Point. But I was going in, Amory Lovins, I don't know if he's still with us, but you know, his wife Hunter Lovins gave the keynote at our sustainability conference about 17 years ago here in Longmont. And I gave a sermon about her last work recently. He points out here, coming from Ecclesiastes, that hath silver shall not be satisfied with silver. He that hath abundance must have more, always. He said our economy driven by greed, avarice, envy, gluttony, luxury, and pride. All of the 7 deadly sins except sloth. In other words, permanent exponential growth on a finite planet will necessarily destroy the planet. And part of what government is for is to try to figure out what we can do with what we have and make a viable society. But there used to be conservative thinkers, Christopher Lasch, The Revolt of the Elites, points out a lot of things, some of which I didn't know, about different wings of the in crowd, and the liberals took over a portion of the universities, and I've been oppressed by them as much as the conservatives.
Thank you very much, Strider.
Yeah, thank you.
Seeing no one else on the list, I'm going to close first call public invited to be heard. I guess the only call public invited to be heard at a study session. So we are now going to go to our special reports and presentations. Do we have any tonight? So we'll move on to our study session items. The first one is the Inclusionary Housing Program 2023 Annual Report. And I see Molly O'Donnell.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Molly O'Donnell, Housing Director for the city. I have with me Christy Wiseman. She started as our Housing Investment Manager in March, and she's here with us tonight to participate and take some of this presentation skills over in the future. So we're gonna be reporting first tonight on the 2023 Inclusionary Housing Annual Report. I'll switch back over to the PowerPoint in a second, but the first thing that I wanted to show was the city website here. I'm actually gonna have to stand for this one, so I gotta drive. Okay, so as part of the planning grant that we received from the state in 2022 and worked with Root Policy Research throughout 2023 and into this year, one thing that they did for us was help us create a real-time data dashboard for our website that is powered by Microsoft Power BI. And so we've took that and we've updated some of that with our more recent data, since that was part of our housing needs assessment that came out earlier in 2023. And we'll be updating this on our website every quarter so that it's kind of a real-time dashboard where people can see unit generation and housing data as it comes out. Something you'll see in here, I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. It replaces some of those graphics that we've seen in the past. But I think that it's really an improvement and would be really great for the ongoing, for council and for the public to be able to see what's going on. This is part of our website redesign as well in the housing area. And so this is really one of those test cases, and I think it's going great. So what we have here on your dashboard, and you can always look this up on our city's website. I usually just end up Googling Longmont Housing Dashboard, and it takes you right to our page. But we have a couple of functions here. So we have our unit generation over time, and this shows how our percentage of affordable housing has changed as we have generated units each year. So all of this data matches the data that you saw presented to you annually at this meeting. Our 2035 aspirational goal is shown here. That's for 12% of all of our housing stock is permanently affordable by 2035. And what this shows is the number of units per year that we would have to produce from this point going forward, so 2024 on, to get there. And so I'm going to dive into that a little bit later, but it's just really interesting. And then you can see here in 2024, we've already logged 8 units in 2024. So we're moving right along. These are some of the more familiar graphics that you might have seen in prior years. The fee and lieu pipeline is here, updated for our 2023 actuals. We're going to go over this in highlights in a moment. Our 2024 projection and a 2025 projection, and you see it, we do project to increase over time. This is also a familiar graphic where we talk about of all of the projects currently in the development pipeline, what those projects are projecting to elect as their option for complying with the inclusionary housing ordinance. And so that will update each year as well. And again, that's not 2023 actuals. That is of all the projects in the pipeline. That's where people are sitting right now in terms of how they want to plan their project. The dollars leveraged and invested. This is also should be a familiar graphic from prior years. Obviously, we blew the leveraged funding out of the water this year. It was very, very high. This really is a function of other new sources coming on. We've had the ARPA funding sources the last couple of years, and then there's been a lot of state funding that has come through in the last year or so, and then there's a lot more to come in other sources. We've got, if you can toggle on these options, we've got market trends that show our median sales price by attached versus detached product over time. And so this is the market trends. We're working on updating for 2023 right now. So those are still showing from the housing needs assessment. We have to do a little bit of work with our consultant from last year to get the methodology transferred over to our data folks in-house. So this is still from 2022, but it will be on here and updated over time. And then this is some of our data from the housing needs assessment as well that just talks about the housing market here in Longmont, how costs have increased, how cost burden looks amongst the households that live here, and where we have gaps in supply for certain affordability levels. So I'm going to go back to our inclusionary housing ordinance overview. I'm just going to make sure we've got our, okay, yep. So we've got a couple of different graphics here showing affordable homes provided over time. That ties to this data here. It's just showing a visual going back to at least the year 2000 here to see how that has changed over time. And then this shows how we're tracking towards that goal year over year as well, in terms of the total number of units. And then we're back. So again, there's a couple of ways to do this, just if you end up playing around, or anybody here tonight or listening in the public later on wants to check it out. There's a couple ways to navigate through, and there's a lot of options to click on just to play around and see how information changes for you. So going forward, rather than creating the 2-page PDF snapshot report of the annual report for the inclusionary housing program, we plan to just report on this through our real-time dashboard instead of creating a flyer material. All right, now I'm going to switch back over. Okay, switching back over to our PowerPoint. So this is just going back to the beginning. We talked about some of our data from that dashboard. And then I wanted to go over a couple of highlights. So just if you recall from our 2022 Inclusionary Housing Annual Report that we did last July, we had 245 units generated in 2022 and a net of 6 this year. That should not be too concerning, although there's always concern over being able to adequately generate units. But we had 4 rentals generated through the Veterans Community Project, permanently affordable, 4 for-sale units through Habitat, also located at Mountain Brook. But we did lose 2 units to aged-out deed restrictions from the old inclusionary housing program that was disbanded in 2011. And so that is a natural occurrence in that case. We would like to keep them in the stock, but it does happen. So we have a 6 net. So we're at 6.18% of that 12% goal. Some of this was graphically shown in the dashboard, but of all those projects in the pipeline, over 70% at the end of 2023 were planning on using fee in lieu as their compliance option. This is an increase from 2022. I do think that we have the fee in lieu revenues have increased a lot from 2022 as well. That's pretty natural, as those projects that started in about 2018 that were subject to the inclusionary housing program once it got put into effect have now reached that stage where they've made it through entitlements, construction, and they are getting their certificates of occupancy. And so our fee in lieu received in 2023 was over $2.6 million. This is a large increase over 2022 and what we expected. Really showing that 70% were, as of 23, we're choosing fee in lieu as their option. I really think that is a couple of drivers feeding into that. One is the fact that we have those projects no longer the projects that came into effect after the inclusionary housing program came through. So we just have more projects generally. But then in 23, you really did see the impacts of construction pricing and interest rates affecting the projects, and building on-site units was deemed too risky in some instances, and the fee in lieu was the safer bet when the pricing was so volatile. So we did update the fee in lieu methodology and the calculation in December 2023. So we have not yet, those numbers, if they're going to change because of that, wouldn't be shown here. We would be seeing that throughout 2024. I wanted to go over some development trends. This is really what I'm trying to show here is the reason that we shouldn't be too concerned about 6 units net. We really just happen to be in between projects because projects go through phases: pre-development, design, permitting, construction, and then they deliver the units. In 2022, we had 244 units because we had 3 major LIHTC projects get their certificates of occupancy, and 2 other market rate rental projects that included affordable units on site also completed in 22. So we just had a big rise. And then after those were completed, a lot of other projects were still in that pre-development or design phase. And so in 2024, we expect about 122 units, as we have Chrisman 2 and Zinnia, 2 other major LIHTC projects that will come online. Plus, there will be other on-site unit provision that adds to that, but just talking the kind of the larger size projects that provide a lot of units. And then over time, we've got a pipeline of larger affordable developments coming through too that will continue to generate units. I just wanted to display, if you look at 2023 and follow the line up, then we have, we're just in this in-between phase, in between these projects. It's just kind of a wave. Our average since 2016 in terms of annual unit production has been 81 units per year, with that peak being in 2022, which is the more than we have seen in any year prior to that. We do need to create an average of 224 units per year to meet that aspirational 12% goal, however. And so to do that, we need more tools in the toolbox than we even have today, including the fee in lieu and our affordable housing fund and our CDBG funds. ARPA has helped boost that, but more is still needed if we're going to get there. You will see that in 2022, our percent of affordable housing stocks was 6.66%. And because we generated 6 units in 23, but market rate units continued to be produced, our percentage actually went down to 6.18, just as the market rate outpaced the affordable generation. So really what it might take is Prop 123 funds, Prop 1B funds, the expansion of the low-income housing tax credit that just passed the legislature, as well as increased capacity in the affordable housing development community. We need developers that want to work in Longmont and build here. That's all needed to keep pace with the 12% goal. So here's a summary of the affordable housing incentives that were used in 2023. We did have 3 projects take advantage of the affordable housing fee waiver program for a total of $311,000 and change in benefit there. And then 2 projects utilized the fee offsets from the affordable housing fund for over $177,000. And then many projects take advantage of those land use incentives, including density bonus and setbacks and those things throughout. So those kind of follow the projects as they go through that entitlement phase. We did update our maximum sales prices for the inclusionary housing program for 2024, which we typically do in the spring of every year after HUD releases their new income data and Boulder County property tax information is readily available. And so these are the updated maximum sales prices that we will put up on the website here after tonight. Those just get updated every spring, and everyone waits for them and anticipates them coming. I will say that the median sales price for attached and detached is really where we set the upper limits of the maximum sales prices. In 2023, the median for attached was $461,358, and now the number here is $448,774. That really is a function of interest rates increasing, because we do use in this calculation sales data, recent sales data, interest rates, property taxes, homeowners insurance rates, private mortgage insurance rates, and HOA fees. So we adjust the sales prices based on what's happening in those arenas. For detached in 2023, the maximum was $601,140, and this year it's $600,162. So not a significant change, but it did go down some. And then some of our major accomplishments this year, we did in 23. We did complete the housing needs assessment We continue to work with Root Policy Research to implement the recommendations, but in 23 we did do the fee in lieu update, and we made some administrative improvements to better the process for the inclusionary housing and implementation of it. We did right-size the middle tier option with the attainable incentives towards the end of 2023. And then in 24, we want to continue working on those affordable housing incentives with Root, some of which you'll see in your next item to be discussed tonight. And then we've been working to align and automize our fee in lieu projections with the planning and building process, make sure we can pull that data out of our systems without having to do a big manual process, and make sure we're aligned. So I would like to see if council has any questions for staff, and I would also like to find out if you'd, going forward, would you continue to want staff to come and do a presentation on an annual basis, given that we have the real-time data dashboard where a lot of this information is there, but I just wanted to let you all think about that and let us know what you'd like.
Do we have any questions from council? Councillor Christ.
I guess it falls under questions, but first of all, I know how hard you work on this project. And so it was a little disappointing to see 6 units, because I know how much effort you put in this last year. And then I'm just looking at the fee in lieu that you received in 2023, so $2,660,000 and so forth. And I was equating that to how many houses or units that would build, and it seemed like it was about 6.65 if I use the city manager's measuring stick of about 400,000 per unit cost to build. So, and then I thought, well, okay, maybe that could have been another 6 that were added on, but that only really moves us up another percentage point. And as time goes by, if you don't make the 224 every year, then I was saying we probably need about 2698 units by 2035. That's what we have left. And we have 12 years, I guess really 11 and a half. So it almost moves it up to now needing 225 per year. But I know you guys have the house pad coming up, and that's going to be a big jump. Mm-hmm. I guess the idea is having about 45,000 homes by 2035. I'm just looking at what would be 5,400 is 12% of that. So I'm guessing that that's the number that is expected for 2035. Now, 12% is really about 2 out of 17 homes. These are just things that as I was reading, I was writing down for myself. And what really stuck out for me is of the incentives that you've used. You built this Village on Main, the Habitat at Mountain Brook, and the Habitat at Sugar Mill, and then Chrisman 2 and Habitat at Mountain Brook again. I realized none of these were outside developers. So what I took from this presentation was, if we're going to get more units, we have to get developers to build them.
Correct. We definitely want developers to want to build affordable housing in our community. I will say that Chrisman 2 was a partnership with a private developer, between the LHA and a private developer, MGL Partners. And they continue to look in Longmont for opportunities as well. We do know that. But the more the better.
Yeah.
I do also want to mention from earlier in your comment that we don't necessarily look at the $2.6 million and the exact units that could produce at 400,000 per unit. We have a lot of other leveraging resources, and really that fee in lieu revenue leverages similar to when we're looking, I suppose it's on our dashboard. But here, this chart here, I mean, the Affordable Housing Fund is what is shown in the orange at the tip top. But what that does is be the last gap filler for all of these other funds that come together and get invested in Longmont, and what it actually takes to build affordable.
But doesn't it actually cost more than 400,000 to build a unit?
It depends on the unit size and type. We've been using that as an average in recent months.
Kind of for the city's portion of it, I'm guessing, because then if the land is involved, then the cost goes up and.
The 400,000 is usually a fully loaded cost per unit once you take into account land and construction and design costs, and then remove whatever fee waivers and any other incentives that help bring the cost down. But so of that 400,000, typically, if you're looking at a typical project pro forma that does include city's funding from the Affordable Housing Fund, the affordable housing only brings a sliver. It closes the last bit of the gap with a lot of other sources.
Okay, so the money we're receiving from the fee in lieu really doesn't allow us to build either. We have to have other sources, the other 102 million.
To maximize, yeah.
Okay. Do you think that will continue in 2024? Is there that much funding available?
Yes, so our fee in lieu projections are, so we brought in just shy of 2.7 on this graph here, and that is so tiny. 3.9 million is our projection for 2024. Plus, other sources are still coming online from the state and local sources as well that we're hoping for at least in 2025 to come in and play a role as well.
And you think you'll get another 102 million? I just noticed that 23 was kind of a rich year for grants and
So
support in that arena.
It was, but what's interesting, there's that much leveraging happening there, but 6 units because of that design, that curve of the project cycle. So a lot of pre-development work brings that money in, and then the construction starts, and then the units get counted as delivered the next year. So 2024 right now, we're projecting 122 units delivered.
Okay. But we still need some developer help to get to 225. Okay. Thank you, Molly.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the website page. It's great.
It is great. It'll be fun to play with, see where we are all the time. So if a developer decides to build, from all of our conversations that we've had, decides to build the units on site rather than fee in lieu, there are a lot of incentives if they build on site, correct?
Correct.
So we do help developers build what they want. It's a partnership, and it does work well. So my question is, it's not a question, it's just an interesting thought process, I guess, is that if we are building through Longmont Housing Authority or partnerships, and do we have enough land, do you think, to make the 12% if developers who own their own land do not build? They give a fee in lieu. That's what I'm wondering. That's hard to know, I guess. So I just find that interesting and would like some kind of a update at some point. Maybe not in council, but it would be interesting to know if we're going to have enough land to meet that 12% if developers do not help us by building it themselves.
Yeah, and I think the 12% is an interesting one to look at in terms of the amount of land that you have, because that's one component of it. The other component is redevelopment opportunities where land may be utilized for something else, but then it's being redeveloped, so that's another capacity piece on top of it. And then I think when we look at where we're heading in terms of density and how many units we build, so Project Mustang / Housepad is a really good example of this, to where we're building more units on less acreage. And so I think it's going to be a combination of all of those tools in terms of how we look at it, from a housing perspective. And then you're looking at for sale product, and you're also looking at rental product that's capital A affordable, and then or attainable in what you're looking at your mix. And so density, height, all of those issues are going to start playing in terms of what we can build, and I think that's what we're going to continue talking to you all about.
Okay. And I would like to make a comment, and I think this is the places we're talking about housing, about the condominium comments. Because we do have developers building apartments that can be condominiums. The problem is right now is construction defects law, which disallows building of condominiums. And there were bills that some representatives were trying to pass in the legislature that failed, didn't make it out of committee. So we understand the issue. We would love to have condominiums for sale, but until we can get over what the barriers are for developers to do that, then it isn't going to happen soon. So I just wanted to jump in immediately, but couldn't.
And I don't know if they're gonna get into this. They have some interesting data that I'm gonna ask Christy to go over, but as Molly was presenting, I was like Googling some information on housing. And in December of 2023, Yahoo Finance did a report, and now I'm talking single-family housing vacancy rates. Centennial was the lowest in the nation in that report. Let me pull this up, make sure. Single-family vacancy, I think it was December 2023, and the piece was Colorado and California cities have some of the lowest vacancy rates, single-family housing. So Centennial had the lowest vacancy rate in the nation at just 0.5% in single-family housing. It was immediately followed by Longmont, which was at 0.8%. Christy just sent me some information, and it's at now, for the numbers they have now,
Hi, Mayor and members of council. Christy Wiseman, Housing Investment Manager. So the latest data that we have from the population estimates by the end of 2023 that planning puts together is that our current single-family vacancy rate for Longmont is a little over 1%. So still very much below what's normally considered a healthy vacancy rate for market transactions is about 5%. So one of the lowest municipalities in Colorado still.
So to say that the apartments that we are building now are sitting vacant is not completely accurate.
so
Is that-
it's a little bit different. And Christy, correct me if I'm wrong, the multifamily vacancy rate is 4%.
Okay.
The single-family vacancy rate is estimated at 0.6%.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The one, I misspoke. The 1% was the combined between single family and rental. And the single family was that 0.6. Thank
It
you,
was
Harold.
0.6. So,
Okay, so it's just 1%.
so if you look at what now we
Total.
have two different sources that are kind of, so what it's telling us is, why is the housing issue so significant? You're below a 1% vacancy rate on single family units. Even when you look at a 4% vacancy rate, really 5% vacancy rate is considered healthy. So what you tend to see is when the vacancy rate in multifamily goes below 5, that's when you see the rental increases. I'm looking at Christy to make sure I'm right. The rental, that's when you tend to see rent start increasing, because what it's saying is the supply is not there. When you see vacancy rates go above 5%, that's when you'll see them hold, or in some cases potentially reduce vacancy. And then even when you get into that number, you have to look at, where's the vacancy really setting? Is it in 1 bedrooms? Is it in 2 bedrooms? Is it in 3 bedrooms? And one of the things that we saw that led us down the road on the Ascent project of really looking at 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms is you don't have as many 3 and 4 bedroom rentals. And so all of those things are in play when we're looking at this information. But yeah, I was kind of shocked when I saw 0.8 and then they said, oh, it's 0.6. That's a really low vacancy rate.
Very low.
Considering on the other side of this article, when you look at, I just lost it again. Cities, key findings. My team's messed up. So give me a second and I'll get that for you.
Okay. Okay. While he's looking for that, is there any more discussion from counselors? Marcia, I can't see you online. Your hand's not up? Okay.
Oh, so
Oh, there
here it
you are.
is. Some of the cities with the highest vacancy rates, and this is again single family. For example, in Florida, you had some with 21%. Well, they had several cities in Florida with 21% single family vacancy rates. It's not bringing it up now for me, but you know, that's really the
Okay.
information we're working on in terms of housing.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And Counselor Hidalgo Faring.
This question is for Harold. What was the name of that study? So if we wanted to look on our own.
Smart Asset. It was written by Patrick Villanova, and it was on Yahoo Finance.
Okay. And,
I'll send it to you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
And then I do have one more question, and it was really around to Molly about changes that we have made to our ordinances. Have you noticed a shift in developers wanting to build on-site? I mean, because if we're looking at true affordable housing or inclusionary housing, it is having that mix within a neighborhood rather than funneling that funds to a low-income neighborhood. So, you know, the idea is really to have it dispersed throughout the city. So what have you noticed as far as trends with what we're doing so far?
What we do know is just about right off the bat, we had a developer interested in doing a land donation that is still on the table and moving forward. And then, so they're starting to explore the other options. We do know that we do have some interest in on-site affordable units, but they're still in the planning phase. So they're weighing all the pricing and that type of thing.
Got it.
Purchasing existing units and transitioning. So it sounds like we also have a developer, at least one, looking at purchasing existing units and converting them to deed restricted as one of the options.
Yeah, and I mean, I think about, you know, conversations we've had, you know, with the inception of the Attainable Housing Fund. I don't think there's anyone on here who just wants rental. It's really what the market is for developers. And, you know, we're trying to incentivize the creation of for sale units because that is how you're going to build equity and you know, a vibrant community. But it's really, this is what we're getting. And, you know, and we do have to support a mix of both. I think that, you know, that falls in line with our goals and objectives as far as a diverse housing stock, so.
It is the case that every rental new construction that you see going up, all of those had a market study attached, and a market study showed that it was a good investment, a good project. It would fill. Our vacancy rates show that it would fill, which is the main determining
There's
line.
just a lot of needs nationwide. So
The needs are so high.
Yeah, there it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great presentation, and yes, I would like it annually.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay. So our next one is the proposed bill for an ordinance amending Title 15 of the Longmont Municipal Code on land use regulations and planning approval processes to further incentivize affordable housing unit generation. And I'm assuming you're saying incentivize for sale affordable housing unit generation, or is this just
unit
build?
generation, affordable
Okay.
unit generation.
All right, thanks.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. All right, on to number 2. So back in February, staff came forward to council to present the route study, the last bit of the route study that we have. talking about our affordable housing incentives, and it made recommendations for ways to modify them to further affordable housing incentives. And so you gave direction to staff to bring back several of those items, and we're going to be seeing a couple of them tonight. But first, I wanted to give you kind of a where we're at with all of the root policy recommendations, because we've been working on this now for a year. Well, the study itself was more than a year, but we've been talking to council about this for a year. So some of the first recommendations they made were to modify the fee in lieu methodology, and that included raising the fee in lieu. And we also implemented a 3-year schedule to make sure it was anticipated for developers and everybody was on the same page about when it would change. That was all completed in November. And then we made a couple of other administrative improvements based on those recommendations, including removing the voluntary alternative agreements and amending the credit compliance option. So that's all been complete. One of the other recommendations was to evaluate the land donation option to clarify the process. That's something that is continuous work. We just need to make sure that we work with developers and have clear expectations and know what the rules are and get everybody on the same page. So that's something we'll pay attention to in the long term. I mentioned earlier, we right-sized the middle tier option to stack with the attainable fee waiver program. And then we moved into the incentives review. So this is everything that was presented in February. Some of the administrative improvements, the fast track review process was something that was mentioned, knowing that Prop 123 is going to require some level of a fast track review process for affordable. We've been working on that for a long time. We've actually, we tried a fast track review process a long time ago, but really the main function of how fast a project gets through entitlements is submittals and communication, and it's really more of a human element there. But what we did do is use the affordable housing funds to fund a navigator, somebody that knows Longmont's entitlement process and has held hands with smaller affordable developers throughout their process, and that has been just a wild success. The in between Habitat and a lot of the smaller developers that have used that just say it's been indispensable. And there is talk amongst the communities working on Prop 123 that might be an option to satisfy that fast track review process. We're going to wait and see how that plays out, but that's something we would advocate for based on what we've seen. So that's a work in progress, knowing that there's some requirement coming. Public process for requirements for the subdivision plat, that's something you'll be hearing about tonight. Streamlining ADU approvals was one of recommendation. We held that off knowing that there was legislation going through, and so staff is still analyzing how that all fits together. So that is a future endeavor. On the regulatory variances side, you're going to hear tonight about the open space variance, and actually staff added on a wrinkle to that with pocket park recommendations, so those will be coming tonight. The utility and access easements, the recommendation was really to try and minimize those where possible to maximize where the houses can go. The city overall has been working on that for some time with the creation of an urban-based design standard, so that's in progress. Parking standards, making some modifications to that was recommended, and the city's transportation team already came to you with some parking revisions, so that's been done. Tonight you'll hear about density and height bonuses. And then the last two recommendations, we do need more research and stakeholder engagement around the high density exemption and allowing affordable housing as a primary use in mixed use districts. That is something that just needs a little more homework, so we still have some work on the horizon. So I'm going to hand it over to our planning expert to talk about the several that are up for discussion tonight.
Thanks, Molly. I'm in trouble if I'm the expert, but I'll do my best to help everybody understand some of the proposed changes. I'm going to kind of briefly go over some of the items that Root had recommended. There's a lot more detail in your packet, so if you want me to provide more detail, I can answer questions, obviously. Let me know. If I talk about something that doesn't make sense, don't be afraid to stop me and ask me during the presentation. It might be easier to correct or to provide a little more in-depth information at that time. So just let me know on that. But to begin with, the slide that we have up on the screen right now is the first recommendation that came from the root study. And we'll give everybody a minute here. All right. The gremlins are getting us.
It's recycling everything we said back to us. It was. Are we? Okay.
Okay.
I think
No,
we
you're
have it
good.
fixed.
All right. So the first item from the root study that I'm going to talk about really quick is the preliminary plat review process. As everyone may know, or folks in the audience may not, when we do subdivisions in the city of Longmont, any proposal to subdivide a piece of property into 4 or more lots requires that it go through a preliminary plat process. That is a public process where there's required neighborhood meetings, there is neighborhood notice, we go through the DRC review process, we then go to public hearings before the Planning Commission, who is the decision-making body. That process is also appealable to the City Council. So there is some risk for the development community if they choose to go through and create a development that creates more than 4 lots. The thinking, as I take away from the root study and looking at it from the staff side, is that one way to try to encourage for sale units that could be attached or detached would be to remove the public hearing process and the requirement to go through the preliminary plat process and allow people to go straight to a final plat and construction drawings, which would allow for the creation then of subdivisions similar to the house pad project that you just looked at. I think that was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. To go through that process without going through Planning Commission and a public hearing process that ultimately is appealable to the City Council. So when we look at what would happen is that the proposal then would be to remove the steps that are on the left-hand side of the screen, which makes up the preliminary plat process, which again, as we talked about, pre-application meetings, neighborhood meetings, application through the DRC process, then public hearings before Planning Commission, and then an appeal potential to the City Council. I've identified some impacts that I think you should know, that both pro and con related to this. Definitely, you're going to reduce what I believe is uncertainty for the developer. So if they choose to do single-family homes that are a regular single-family development, they would save a step through our development review process that's probably at a minimum 4 to 6 months in the development timeline. So that gets them through our process quicker. But yes, ma'am.
Which process would they be? The pre-application, the neighborhood meeting, which one are you talking about that would give them 4 to 6 months?
The entire preliminary subdivision process that's on the screen,
On the
all
left?
of those steps on the left would go away.
And Councilor Martin has her hand raised. Councilor Martin?
Yes, I wanted to maybe add in, I've been reading about this, innovation in other cities. So I just wanted to, get your agreement or correction. This is something that's being tried in a number of cities that are having similar struggles to increase their housing supply, is that correct?
That's correct. Loveland implemented a couple years ago this very same process for removing preliminary plats. My understanding, though, is that they didn't just do it for affordable housing. They did it for all of their housing.
And, you know, and I wasn't necessarily thinking of just in Colorado either. But reducing, steps in the planning process has been, is going on across the nation, so I just wanted to sort of stick that in there. Thanks.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind here is that the preliminary plat process in the development cycle that we go through from annexing a property to construction starting is roughly 3 steps. You have your annexation of the land, your preliminary plat process where we create and show where the lots and what type of development's going to occur, and then we go to final plat and construction drawings. The final plat and construction drawings are still going to require notice to the neighborhood, letting them know what's going on, but there is no right for them to appeal the proposal to the city council. The only people that have an appeal right during the final plat process is the landowner or the developer. That's it. The neighbors would not have an ability to appeal that decision to anybody. So the change is significant. There is significance here, but I would also say that I believe it is probably one of the biggest incentives you could give a developer that's going to build affordable housing, that wants to do some kind of a subdivision where they could sell product for someone to buy, to save a lot of time and remove a lot of risk from their equation to decide whether or not to go forward. And anecdotally, I would say that this is one of the reasons why I think we've seen in some of our areas where we could have detached for sale housing, people have chosen to do apartments. The apartments don't have to go through the preliminary plat process because it's one lot. They can build 10 buildings on a parcel of ground on one lot, and they don't have to go through that process. So if you were going to choose a minimum of 6 additional months, or not going through and building apartments, there's benefit for them moving forward with apartments from a timing standpoint and a risk standpoint.
So this only applies, it does not apply to land in lieu or,
That's right.
okay, any in lieus.
The way it is written today, it would only be if they provide the 12% on site, and that is the only way they would qualify. So 100 units are going to be built that are on individual lots for sale. A minimum of 12% of those have to be affordable and meet our requirements. That's the benefit. That's how you encourage to meet that gap that you were talking about earlier. But I want to be clear, there is a potential cost. And that's why I wanted to have those impacts up there for the council to see those.
You want a decision tonight on this?
Ultimately, at the end tonight, we're going to ask you to give us some direction on all 5 of the things we're going to talk about here. I think this is probably the most challenging one for you out of all of them.
This is the one that's going to give us a lot of resident feedback as well, that how come we weren't told that this was going up, or how come, even though they would be told.
They would
But-
receive notice, but they would not have a right to an appeal.
I think the answers tonight is we can also deal with, well, we want to give you answers on this, and this, but we may want more conversation on this. Because I think what they're really saying here is one of the challenges in the process is because you don't have to do this, people are opting to build a rental product, multifamily product versus for sale single family.
And these are only for sale units.
Correct. When they're building it on site.
Okay.
And so that's getting at, the direction that you all gave us is to encourage people to build sites, to build units on site. And this is kind of what we're seeing others do that's actually having some success.
Okay.
But if you want to hold this, you can give us direction on the other parts and then say, we want to talk more about this, and we can work on that.
I think the only reason that I would be interested in holding it is to hear from Councilor Rodriguez and Councilor McCoy, and they're not here, so I would like their input. I don't know how the other councilors feel, but. Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll move on to the next ones real quick for you then.
Okay.
So the next item that we had identified was the open space buffers that are required when you're building adjacent to city parks and open space properties. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples here on the next slide. So these are two existing conditions. One represents the way that the code is today, which is on the left-hand side. The right picture shows what would happen if we remove the requirement that a development adjacent to a city park, as an example, in both of these cases, has to have either a buffer, an open space area adjacent to it, or has to have a road next to it. On the left-hand side, this is over in the Renaissance neighborhood, so southwest Longmont, over by the North Star Development area. And what you see in red is the outline of the open space that's owned by the HOA. So in order for this development to be approved, the property on the left side of the red lines, I think this will show up. So over here where you see the prairie dog holes, these were two parcels dedicated to the city for a park, okay? The code says that they must build a buffer between the backyards and the park property, or you have to put a road in between the homes and the park property. That's the way the code reads right now. This developer chose to put in an open space buffer yard. And so, as you can see, this adds an area thin that is not being used for homes. It adds additional cost to the HOA that have to maintain an area that's adjacent to a park. The goal and some of the concerns from parks and natural resources, which I totally understand, is that oftentimes we run into problems where we have questions about where property lines are. We have people that first they feel like they have gazing rights, and next thing you know, they think they have grazing rights, and then they have ownership of the park, and then next thing you know, they're using it as their own yard. Sometimes they're dumping things over the fence because that's an easy place to put something. Well, it ends up as a maintenance issue then for our staff, who then have to clean up yard debris, things like that. Their thinking was that by having roads and or open space that's owned by the HOA, there is an intermediary between the city's property and the property that is public or private property. The proposal, as we've tried to identify again in allowing for the best use of land, is to allow what we have done over by, this is, I'm going to probably call it the wrong one. I believe this is Spangler Park up at, over by Lashley, Mountain View, and in that area. And Kensington?
Park that,
No, it's not
Oh,
Kensington.
no.
I'm pretty sure it's. Yeah, it's off of Mountain View. Yes.
yeah,
And it's Spangler.
Spangler.
And this park obviously was developed long ago, and these subdivisions were, but as you can see, the yards are adjacent to the park. You know, there may be some issues that we have to deal with occasionally over here. I don't know that to be true, but just based on the reason for the creation of this buffer or this separation that we've put into our code. But the proposal is to remove that requirement, and specifically for affordable housing that provides it on site, so that we can make sure that we are using as much land as possible for the creation of housing, instead of just buffer areas that may or may not be usable from an open space standpoint, and allowing for the most creation of affordable housing on the property. There, again, the impacts right now reduces land available for homes by having that buffer. There is that potential for conflict with city and adjacent neighbors due to park operations. We do have ball fields and other kinds of uses that are adjacent, but I question how much 20 feet actually does buffer a ball field from somebody's house anyway. But again, that was some of the thinking there. Questions again on ownership maintenance. Sometimes we may have issues where that arises. But again, one of the benefits I think from an HOA standpoint is reducing the cost to those folks that live there of having to maintain property that really they're not getting much use out of. It's a buffer that the city is asking for from our property that we own. The next item that I have, there's two related to pocket parks. The first is that we identified there was an error. There's a typo in the requirements for multifamily. The code currently says that the first 25 units of multifamily are supposed to provide a pocket park. That in the code that was prior to 2018 was set at 50 units. That was our intention. We've identified that that was a typo and changed to 25 when the code was adopted in 2018. So we would ask the council give us permission to take that back to 50. That's a similar ratio to how we require it for single family homes. And it seemed to work really well. This has been a hindrance, as noted in your council comm, for smaller developments then, because it doesn't take much to get to that 25 units and then have to try to find out how to provide a half-acre pocket park on a property is very troublesome. So for some of the infill smaller sites, this is definitely a problem and limits the ability to do some units. So we would ask that be changed back to 50. The second part related to pocket parks is the distance requirement from a city park that allows you to be exempt from providing a pocket park. Right now in the code, if you're a quarter mile away from an existing park that's constructed, you get an exemption. You don't have to provide a pocket park because the thinking is that a quarter mile is walkable and usable for those folks that live there. The language is specific. It talks about a neighborhood park. It does not include a community park. It does not include our greenways. I think, interestingly, as you think about it, my needs when I had children that were 3 and where I wanted to live and the amenities I wanted are different now that my kids are gone. And my wife and I want to walk on the greenway and use the trail system more than I want a playground. I think we should be looking at the needs of the people that live there, that there may be different preferences for those people. So I think we should include those amenities that the community has made investment in our greenways, our community parks, and our neighborhood parks. And if they are within that quarter mile, that we should give them credit for that if they want to and not require a pocket park. My example for you is Housepad. Housepad was, if you drew a quarter mile radius, just misses the recreation center. It hit a future community park, barely touched a future neighborhood park, touched 2 school sites, and was within a quarter mile of Left Hand Creek Greenway. And they had to provide 2 acres worth of pocket park because they weren't within the quarter mile of a neighborhood park that was built or funded. If we would have had this standard to where they could have counted the greenway, they could have used 2 acres for more housing in that project without having to try to get a variance or request an exception from the planning commission or from council on that. So that's a real example of where we had to create open space to meet the standard, because the way this was written, it wouldn't allow us to count the greenway that some people would see as a benefit and an amenity that they would use if they were living there. So we would ask that you can allow us to make those changes related to incorporating greenways, community parks, neighborhood parks into that quarter mile distance. And yes,
That's it?
I got one last one, but this one I can cover quickly, and I
Oh, okay.
apologize.
No, don't apologize.
It's the changes related to the density bonus, changing it from Root recommended going from a 20% density bonus to 25, if they include on-site affordable housing. And so the table in your packet showed how this increase to 25 would, the number of units it would add in the various zones for an acre development. The impact for some of these smaller properties under an acre or less are pretty small, but when we have any of our remaining greenfield areas that we're really trying to use to the highest and best use, I would say, of providing as much housing as possible, these numbers will add up to significant units. And again, they only get these if they're providing them on site. So we do believe this is a way to encourage people to move forward with providing their affordable units on site and generate numbers to get closer to that 12% goal the council has. And that's the end of my presentation. So
Thank you. This
So
is a lot.
So Mayor, I know you did mention wanting to hear from your fellow council members that aren't here. And so you all can give us direction. We can also clip the video from this session and provide it to them. And then we could, bring a first reading with what you all give us direction on, and then actually go in and do an in-depth presentation for the entire council at that time. Or B, we can let them review the video, put an item on the agenda, and then quickly discuss or go over it. Obviously not in as much detail, but listen to the remaining two members that are part of this conversation and then bring an ordinance. But I wanted to let you know there's a couple of options.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from this council that is seated tonight? I have some. So, starting with the very first one that we talked about, the open space variance, just for a clarification, because we're talking about open spaces and public property, we're not talking about the 150-foot setback, are we? This is
Correct.
only
We are
for
not
parks.
talking about the 150-foot riparian setback.
Okay. Removing the buffer, the only questions I have are, number one, I would like to require that if there are fences on these developments that are right up next to the park, that there are no gates in those fences so that people cannot come and go from the park. Other than that, I don't really see a problem with it. I know we'll get complaints about lawnmowers and weed whackers but probably not as much as removing the public meetings. So the other question I had was the quarter mile from a greenway or a park. For me, it depends upon the development. If they have to get across a major street to get to that park, because of where the development is, and it tends to be lower income, and they are in a place where they have to cross a major street or thoroughfare, or to me that's a problem, in that we don't develop an area that is for lower income only, mainly because of where it's situated in the city, that the developer can't get the funding that they want out of rentals for sale. That's just a thought process of where it could go. I don't know that it would. But to your point, when you said as an older person, you only want the greenway to walk on, but at some point you're going to sell your house, probably to a family that has 3-year-olds, again, possibly. So I guess that doesn't have a lot of meaning for me. It should be next to a park or a greenway that anybody could use, any age group, because I am hoping that as we age and sell our homes, we can have younger people coming in purchasing them. So, unless it's a 55-plus development. So those were my comments on it. Oh, there's your hand. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I like all of them, and, I do think we need to hear from our two missing council members. I like, Mr. Dominguez's, idea of having a fast track first reading so that we could have some discussion on that, if I understood it correctly. And then, Mayor Peck, I'd like to understand a little more about the, not having gates into the park, because I know, up in Fort Collins and Loveland, I lived in a single-family development where they were designed that way, so that there were, paseos into the park to make the neighborhood, encourage walkability in the neighborhood. So what is the downside of doing that?
Just thought process that are going through my head. The downside is obviously they're going to be within a quarter mile of the park. If not, they're going to be on top of the park, actually, or the green space. I am thinking of people other than the neighborhood who would be in the parks or on the green spaces, going into people's yards, having more access into that. And we haven't done that here. Have we developments where residents can just open their gate from the back and walk into the park, situated right on the park?
I'm not familiar with
I don't think we've done
parks, but I do know that some of the greenways in town, there are gates that folks have put where they can open and access into the greenway. I know some of the concerns is the swing of the gate. We don't want it to open into where someone might be going by and get injured versus opening into their own property. But I'm not familiar with all the parks to be able to know if there are
Okay.
instances where the access has been allowed or people have created it.
But that's not disallowed per our code, that an individual homeowner could do that.
I am not probably the best one to answer that one from what is in the park regulations. From a fence
Okay.
standards in our development code, there's no preclusion on putting gates into a fence. So if it's on your property and you wanted a gate, you could have a gate
Regardless of what's on the other
regardless of
side.
what's on the other side.
Okay,
There may be a preclusion somewhere in our regulations related to access to a park that I'm not aware of.
okay, if you could just find that, that would be great. So those are my concerns, Counselor.
I think, there's a middle ground that exists in my neighborhood, Bell Ridge, where there are, instead of alleys, or streets, because they're minimizing the number of streets, it's a PUD. There are fenced paseos style walkways, and only there are there gates from the walking path into a communal space. And that's sort of the model that I had in mind.
What's an aseo?
Pardon me?
What is an aseo?
Paseo, a path.
Okay,
So, I don't know, you have to look at it.
It's
What is it?
they're called paseos.
paseos.
And what they are is really it's a common owned open space area that is usually between residential structures where you would have doorways and entrances to your unit that face out to this grass or manicured space with sidewalks, and then you would go to your parking area, or your guest might come in through this open space area and then find your unit. And then at the end, there would be an access gate that might tie into that park area that Councilmember Martin was talking about.
So it was part of the original development to do it that way?
It seems like yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, that makes sense. Okay, thank you for your comments. Do we, now direction, do we want to wait until the other two counselors are here, McCoy and Rodriguez, before we say put this on first ordinance, or give direction to come back with answers to our questions or concerns? Counselor Christ.
I would like to move that we take no action on the research recommendations at this time. Part of that is I feel like it doesn't get us to the point of units actually built on site. I think we have to address the idea that 70% are taking the fee in lieu, and I don't see that any of these overcome that. Although number 3 is interesting, but maybe more when we get to middle income housing. So.
Okay, so she made a motion that we don't take any action on this tonight. Further discussion, is there a second? Counselor Hidalgo Faring.
So, yes, I'll go ahead and second,
Okay.
but for different reasons. I do believe that we need to hear from the rest of council as well before moving forward.
So I think that's a different piece. If
Okay.
it's take no action, then
No action.
you're
yeah.
directing us to not do anything.
Mhm. Oh,
If it's
okay.
bring it back
Well,
again,
yeah. See, I personally, I feel good about moving forward with the second, third, and fourth. I feel based on, these were the recommendations from the Root Consulting, and
Other than the change related to the 25 to 50 on the multifamily.
Yes, yeah, and that
that
was
was from staff.
from staff.
That identified an issue.
Okay, and then, so, and which was specifically to address the building of for sale units. I don't feel comfortable about the first, yet. I would really like to hear community weigh in. That's something that does concern me, is eliminating that public due process. So, you know, I'm gonna have to research that one a little bit more before I can confidently say yes or no. But I mean, I'm fine, if other council members are fine with the next 3, I mean, I have no problem with bringing the last 3 forward.
So I'm a little confused. Are you making the
So,
motion?
I
you
think that's
seconded hers.
different, yeah, I think that's different.
So you're not seconding?
So I will not second that one.
Okay. Counselor Yarbrough.
Thank you, Mayor. I, too, am on the same page with Mayor Pro Tem. I thought we were going to bring back the preliminary plat review process when the other counselors were here. And definitely, I'm okay with the open space buffers, the density bonus. The only thing I had about the pocket parks, I feel like being a single mom, and of course my kids are grown now, but when they were younger, having a park very close by was very important to me, more than a green space, especially if you have more younger kids. So, and I agree with the mayor about if there was a street that you had to cross, maybe you just need that 15-minute break to watch them on the playground so you could take a breather and then go back in the house. You know what I'm saying? So as long as, I don't know, for me, and maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, you were stating that if there was one or any of the others, right? So if there's a greenway but there's no park around, then that's fine for the developers. But if there's no park around and we're expecting that parent to go drag their kids to the greenway, and maybe they don't have a bike, maybe they can't afford a bike. So I don't know, for me as a single mom, I feel like that would have been a lot of work. And I would definitely want a park to be close by to where I can go and watch my kids play for 30 minutes or whatever, and then come back in the house or whatever. instead of walking up a greenway and I love the greenway, don't get me wrong. No emails, please. I love the greenway, seriously. But I'm looking from a perspective as a parent who is very, very busy and may have, several kids and may be a single parent. So that part doesn't rub me the right way. So I don't know. I think it should be a park somewhere for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. It doesn't, even if you're not a single mom, but it has to be safe for a 10-year-old to ride their bike. You can't say you can't go because you have to cross 17th and the traffic's horrible. So I have a problem with that, Counselor Christ.
Why don't I change my motion to say we take no action on the research numbers 1, 2, and 4, but allow the changes detailed in number 3 until the other counselors can weigh in. Number 3 would be the changing from 25 units to 50 units, I believe. Oh, no, never mind. That's the one about the pocket park.
So what I heard.
It is a part of it. Just
Yeah. It is.
it's kind of a 3A, 3B. 3B would be what Councilmember Yarborough and the mayor were talking about. 3A would be the correction, the typo, the 25 to the 50.
Okay, so approving 3A and saving 1, 2, 4, and 3B for when the other counselors are present.
Yeah.
Okay.
1, 2,
Yeah,
and
let's start
4,
again.
yeah.
So
Oh, I've got this piece.
if I
right
can
here,
kind of
so I'm
help
looking.
here, what I think I've heard thus far is the open space buffer and the density bonus. I think I had Councilmember Martin, Councilmember Yarborough, and Councilmember Hidalgo Faring say I'm just trying to work through what everybody said. Those are the two that thus far I think I have at
think I
least
have it
3.
figured
There
out.
may be I don't know, Mayor. I think you didn't indicate on the open space. Well, the open space buffer, you said, well, no gates. But are you okay with the open space buffer?
I am.
Okay.
That was just a thought process.
And are you okay with the density bonus?
Yes.
All right, so I have 4 council members, and Councilmember Chris, I don't know where you are on the open space buffers or the density bonus.
I would like to wait until the other
Okay.
counselors are available. And I guess my motion could be, shall we allow the changes detailed in 3A? Does everyone agree in that?
What was 3A again?
3A is the correction from 25 units to 50 units, which was originally a typo.
Oh, I'm okay with that.
Okay. So what we could do to kind of help council move through this is we can come back to the council when we have everyone here. Specifically focus on the preliminary plat review process in 3B, and then go over without as much detail, since we have 4 council members that have given us direction on this in terms of the open space buffers, the correction, and then the density bonus, but use our time to focus on preliminary plat review process and pocket parks.
So 1
Is
and
that
4.
complete? Does that make?
No, 1
Okay.
and 3B.
Yes. So, so I move that we bring back, we give direction to go ahead with the density bonus and the open space buffers, but we would like for you to bring back preliminary plat review process and the pocket parks for discussion.
And the typo.
And 3A.
Sure.
Counselor Martin?
I agree with the motion as the mayor stated it, but has Councilmember Chris, withdrawing her motion, or are we stacking up two motions?
I think she withdrew it. So, yeah, the first one failed for lack of a second, and the second one that she made, she withdrew.
Okay, thank you, I wasn't, it's hard to hear from her.
I know.
And since it's a study session, if council's direction based on what I just said regarding how we bring it back, if you all agree with me, you can just say, you give me the direction based on how I recited what you all said, and we can just bring it back in that way, if that's easier.
In general business?
Yeah, it'll either be another study session or general business
General business.
when we bring it back.
Okay. But I didn't get a second for my motion, did I? Oh. The motion was that we give direction to go forward with the open space buffer and the density bonus, except for 3A. And that we bring back in a general business format, the preliminary plat review process and pocket parks.
That still said except 3A. I still didn't hear a second.
Oh, I thought Councilmember
Okay. So my motion was seconded by Councilor Yarbrough. Councilor Chris, did you have a question about them? 3A was
Yeah.
part of that.
It was included?
To bring it back.
He said except, yeah.
Oh, along with. Any more discussion? Let's vote on that then.
Let me make sure I've done except
I
for 3A.
think we got it.
Can you read that on the screen?
I can't get it back.
We don't do that. We do that. We do the first part. We
Along
3A.
with
We don't do
3A.
And bring back, yes, that is correct.
So I have a little more discussion.
Yeah, I think that we've closed discussion.
Okay. I thought we had agreed we would wait till the other councils were here to hear those other two items.
We are. He's going to bring it back. I apologize to everybody out there. Okay, do you have your direction? Do you need anything else? Where is it?
go to live meeting now. I exited out of you.
So that passed unanimously with Councilor Rodriguez and Councilor McCoy absent.
That's it for this item, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. So we are on the last item, which is the methamphetamine affected properties overview. I get to take another bite now?
No, that's what I've been doing. It's hard to do Zoom. This is hard. I'm getting all confused.
Okay,
Welcome, Molly O'Dowell.
thank you. I'm going to open us up tonight, but we're going to have a team presenting tonight. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves as they do come up, so just so we don't have to go through mic to everybody. Okay, so we're here tonight to present on methamphetamine affected properties. This was requested by council by a motion back in April that staff would bring this back. So we kind of wanted to just set the stage for why this is an important issue to discuss here in this forum, going over some of the basics. So for health risks of methamphetamine use, there's a lot of research going on out there, but what we're going to just introduce tonight is the basics of the health risks according to what is publicly available on Boulder County Public Health's website and the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment's website. This is really what sets the basis for, later in the presentation, we'll go over the testing and remediation process, which is also driven out of those two groups. So I'm just going to call it meth so I don't stumble on the word over and over. Meth contamination is created when a person smokes meth and can be spread by touching contaminated surfaces. Meth contamination in public spaces where exposures are typically infrequent and short in duration do not present significant health risks in most cases. Health risks are higher in private residences where meth has been manufactured or used more frequently. Contaminated surfaces due to someone who has used meth touching the surface or previously airborne residue that has settled can expose others through dermal absorption due to skin contact with the contaminated area or through ingestion if hands are then put into the mouths without cleaning. Because meth is metabolized quickly in the body and expelled within a few days, health risks primarily relate to long-term chronic exposures. If someone experiences a significant level of exposure to meth, they can become ill. In general, infants, children, the elderly, and people with compromised immune systems are at a higher risk for complications. However, meth exposure can affect healthy adults as well. That is verbatim from the website, just to make sure we're operating on a common ground there with what health risks are as research is emerging. The state does set the testing thresholds. They are based on the risk of daily exposure in a residential setting to infants and young children. So the state says this specifically on their public-facing information, that the limits are conservative to protect those most vulnerable because the long-term health effects of exposure are not certain at this time. The limit for testing is 0.5 micrograms per 100 square centimeters. And the state's information pages on meth make a point to state that it should not be assumed that a meth test result over this threshold indicates an adverse health effect. It's more a data-based threshold, based just conservatively as research continues. Colorado generally is kind of in the middle of the range of some of example states out there. For example, less conservative states on the testing threshold, Utah calls it remediation needed at 1.0 micrograms. California is at 1.5, and then in the more conservative range, Idaho is at 0.1 micrograms. So we're kind of in the middle of at least a couple of those examples. It is very important to note that testing, according to the state rules, is a should and not a shall. This is in statute. Now, once you have a positive test, you're in a shall situation when it comes to remediation. So there are community concerns. This is why we're here tonight. There are impacts to properties, and we're going to dig into that a little bit further. But I'm going to invite Sarah Arney up here to talk a little bit about neighborhood impacts.
Hi, Mayor Peck, council members, Sarah Arney, and I'm Longmont Public Safety. The neighborhood impacts, we could definitely take a deep dive, but that would be an entire presentation on its own. I refer to them as drug houses, as that's how residents refer to them. To give you a general idea, we see an increase in criminal activity around these drug houses, which creates a sense of fear and safety concerns for neighbors. We often see it takes some time for neighbors to report the illegal activity or behavior they're witnessing due to the fear of retaliation. The quality of life for the neighbors decrease for many reasons. In one instance, we learned children living around a drug house were not allowed to play outside in their driveways or in their neighborhood due to the drug activity at this specific house. There is usually a decrease in care for these homes, which causes a blight for the neighborhood and potentially, affect property values in the area. Essentially, the harm that is created in the neighborhood by one drug house could take years to repair. Commander Carey McDonald is here if you do have any questions specifically on what public safety is doing with these homes, but we can get to questions later unless you want to address that now. Thank you.
We can hold questions until everyone has spoken.
So then I'm going to invite up Dana Hermson to go over kind of the code enforcement lens.
Mayor, members of council, Dane Hermson, Code Enforcement Manager. I'm going to talk a little bit about our process for handling meth-affected properties. So our role is really to keep people out. Once we have one discovered, we'll go out, we post it with a placard designating it as a meth-affected property, and we'll typically board them up unless there's very little risk of anyone breaking in, such as it's an apartment in a managed complex or something like that. Let's make sure I hit all those. So yeah, it keeps everyone out. The only people allowed in are licensed personnel who can either test for meth or who are allowed to clean it up. Those companies are certified through the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. The testing companies, called consultants in the state law and in our code, are actually certified industrial hygienists that get a little bit of additional training on methamphetamine, and then they are the only people qualified to take samples. And they just need to remain vacant until they complete the process. That's pretty straightforward. We have two ways that we become aware of the meth properties under our code. One is if we have a law enforcement officer that goes in and sees an active cook site. We know that's not a safe situation. They can then give us a statement of probable cause. We can immediately post the property and secure it against entry, and then they have to go through the full testing and remediation process. That very rarely happens. I think we've had that happen once that I'm aware of in the last 7 years. Almost none of them are actually active cook sites that are discovered. The other way that we find them is through testing. And that's can be done as part of a real estate transaction. Owners or tenants can decide to test because they're worried. We have the police doing some testing as part of their warrants if they're concerned about drug presence in the houses. But those are the majority of them that we get. So they'll go out, they'll test, they find it's positive, they have to report those results to the state and to the county health departments. The county will then issue a letter declaring it a meth-affected property, and that's when we typically get involved. And so that starts the same process. We go out, we typically board up the property, we post the declaration, we also send a certain notice to the owner, just stating some of the state rules around it.
I'm going to jump in with Dane really quick. One of the things that we're hearing, and I think it's more frequent now, is actually when people are selling multifamily, single-family homes. I think we're hearing that it's more common that people are now specifically asking to test the properties. And recently, I think there was a quadplex that was for sale that the buyer tested, and I think it ended up testing positive and then went into
That was an eightplex.
Eightplex. And so that's becoming a little more common in terms of people, either individual buyers or people buying multifamily units that are requesting these tests as part of that acquisition.
Yeah. And so I've also got just one note here I want to mention. So there are little home tests you can take and you can sample. They don't have any evidentiary value for us. We don't take any action if someone calls and say, I bought a home kit and did a swab and it shows meth. That has no value to us as evidence, so we do not get involved. All right, so the general remediation process will start typically with a full preliminary report created by the consultant. This is a very thorough test where they take swabs in many locations throughout the house as designated by the regulations that the CDPHE has set forth. They'll then create a remediation plan as part of that report. At that point, the owner can hire a company to do the actual remediation. They'll go in, they can sometimes scrub walls and clean hard materials and get it down below that threshold of 0.5 micrograms. Often, though, they do have to remove drywall, carpet, cabinets, everything that is touched. Let's see. Yeah, and then the consultants just go and retest to clear it. If there are common areas where, say there's a shared attic, they do have to go in there and test as well. If that comes back positive, they then have to go into any other units that connect to that. We've had that happen at, I think, Clover Basin Apartments. That was a big issue about 10 years ago. So then I just put together a little bit of data on the number of meth cases we've had. This is over the last 5 years. And the next slide is pretty similar, but I break it down a little more, so I'll just go there. So 2023 is not as bad as it looked. That is the year where last year we had the 8-plex where 7 of the units tested positive. So we also had more police testing, and you can see LHA was doing some testing. So I don't think there was anything dramatic happening to boost those numbers. It just happened to be 8 in one unit, and then also PD testing and LHA testing. And then duration of meth remediation, this can take a very long time. I was actually a little bit surprised that the median was only 120 days. We've had them sit for years. I suppose we do have some where it'll be very minor. They've just got one little part of the HVAC that's contaminated, and the company will just tear that out, and then they're clean. But if they have to do substantial remediation and testing, it takes many, many months to complete that. And a part of that is because of the cost. I'm going to go to the next slide because that's where we discuss that a little bit. So these numbers are based on LHA data from the last 3 years from the units that they've cleaned up. We don't have data for single-family homes. Owners aren't required to share how much they're paying, so I'm guessing those would be higher than these, but this is the only cost data we have, the median cost being $19,000 and the mean being $33,000. I know that Lisa Galliner, when she was here, told me they had one apartment that cost over $100,000 because they had to tear everything out and basically rebuild it. So that's one of the biggest drivers of the time that it takes to clean them up, is owners often don't have the money, the resources to get it cleaned up right away. It takes a lot of work, and a lot of times insurance won't pay for it at all. So they're on their own to figure out those costs.
To talk about it from the Housing Authority's perspective, we've actually had, I'm thinking off the top of my head, Molly, we've had like 4 that were in excess of 100,000. And so, but you have a lot that are lower. And so that's the hard part on this is, the mean and the median may be here, but the reality is, and we've seen this as a housing authority, you drop 4 in a year, and when we had insurance, if you had 2 in the same unit, the first one the insurance would cover, the second one they wouldn't because of the deductibles. So you're out of pocket in cash with that. And as you all have seen in your role as a housing authority commissioners, some of these are lasting longer because it's really the financial ability to go in and make the corrections into the units. We no longer have meth remediation unit as a housing authority, and we were one of the last groups that did. So what you're seeing is on the private side, many of the private insurances are no longer covering this. So that's the challenge that homeowners get into our people who own homes, whether they're living in it or renting it. This is what they get into when they test positive.
And then I think Molly was going to share a case study from LHA.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
So the Longmont Housing Authority has chosen a path of transparency on this issue. We've been vocal about the impacts because we do think that you cannot affect change unless you have the tough conversation and bring it out there. So this is just LHA's story. This meth contamination can occur across all types of housing. This is not to say that LHA stands alone. We just are ready to talk about it, which many housing providers or even individual owners, it's too big and scary and risky to talk about. But we have taken that risk, knowing that if somebody is going to do something, we will stand up and raise our hand. So this is not about affordable housing. This is just a portfolio of apartments, an owner of a portfolio of apartments that has lived this world. So of the 462 housing units that LHA manages, we've had 9 units at the beginning of this year down from meth remediation. So that is 2% of the portfolio. So it is still, we're talking a small number, but they just come with large price tags. But still, that's 9 units, that's 9 families that we could house otherwise. As of today, between the beginning of the year and now, we got that actually down to 2 units that are down. So that's still less than 1%. Still, since 2021, LHA has spent just shy of $900,000 remediating meth units, all of which, every dollar of that could have been used for supporting other affordable housing uses. From what we have seen from our down units, meth use does not follow a demographic profile in regards to race, ethnicity, or age. We've seen it all. The use of meth is not something that you generally find on a background check when you're screening a prospective renter. Convictions are extremely rare, and so it doesn't generally show up there. It's very, very rare to actually evict, for LHA, evict a tenant due to meth use. When we do end up with a contaminated unit, it's usually because we found evidence of it upon move out. Some of the impacts of what a down unit can do. We've already mentioned here that there's no insurance to cover the cleaning and reconstruction costs. And when properties are income restricted, we are not money makers. We have operating budgets that are very tight. And so this money is not necessary. We don't have a pot sitting around waiting for this. Generally, we found that even a tenant that has lived there for 1 month, we had in one case, we remediated a unit, reconstructed a lot of features of the apartment, and then we had a tenant move in, and within a month, we found out meth was happening. That person vacated, and we were at another rebuild situation within a month. If we talked about on the case, on the pricing, the cost impact. A rebuild is very expensive, certainly over $100,000. I think that we have one that's going to reach a higher rate just because it was so significant. But there's a lot of them where they're just a cleanup because they are contaminated, but not so badly that you can't clean it and then test clean. But those are $5,000 at least. And so you could smoke in a unit on a very limited basis and already trigger $5,000. And that's something we're trying to get the word out there when we're talking to service providers, that caseworkers that work with individuals. We want that message loud and clear that, even one time you could be putting the whole situation in jeopardy. Affordable housing is often funded by private equity investors through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And so we have performance targets for keeping the units rented so that those investors can pull the tax credits. The reason they put money in is A, for an altruistic means, and B, thank you for that investors, that's really wonderful. We couldn't do it without you. And B, because they're able to pull tax credits. And if you have a unit that's down and not being rented, it doesn't qualify for those tax credits. So it can put the program at risk. A unit can be down over 100 days for cleanup. That's kind of the 120-day mark that Dane was mentioning. That's what I had in mind. That sounds like a cleanup. Our longest running down unit has been down for 600 days as we piece together the funding to complete the reconstruction. The significant lost rent can jeopardize the financial viability of the property, like I've mentioned, but also it's a community concern because we could have housed a family for that long. It does cause, we do see this on the ground, that it causes concern for neighbors' physical health, but also it takes a toll on mental health. Knowing that there's a contaminated unit near you can really weigh on somebody, and if you already have mental health concerns, it can really exacerbate it. what we're trying to do. So this is a very, solutions here. There's nothing black and white that is an easy solution. We are working on the meth task force with Boulder County, the state, and other public housing providers. Really what we've done is just broken open the tough conversations and trying to set up groups to work on solutions and brainstorm and research and see what is out there that we could do. And then also, we have been working for some time on a pilot program to install meth detection alarms. And that is really an attempt to be a prevention mechanism, not a gotcha situation necessarily, but it could alert us and then we could inspect and then see if there is enough concern to move forward with testing. But generally, the hope is that it would prevent someone from going there in the first place. So I just wanted to tell a little bit of a story because I feel like this conversation would be missing a bigger piece if we didn't do that.
So one of the things I want to clarify that Dane said is they've only had one case where it was public safety identified as a cook site. We, from the Housing Authority perspective, and one of our newer facilities that's in Tamales Point, there's no demographic. So this was an age-restricted unit. During the eviction, on other issues, it was determined that we needed a test based on what they were seeing. That test came back, and the industrial hygienist told us that was either the highest or the second highest test result that they've seen on the Front Range on that unit, which clearly told us they were probably cooking meth in that unit, but you never saw it. And so, you would hear things and it led to other conversations, but to give you a sense of the impact, that was one that was vacant for a really long time. And to give you a sense of what they had to deal with, it was so cluttered in the unit that as they were moving through it, I'm looking at Sarah, that wasn't the only thing we found in there, but it took them 3 hours to probably get 10 feet into the door of the unit, and then that's when they started seeing things. So again, it's those things that you see when you're dealing with it, but then seeing a level high enough that there was no way it was just smoking in it. The unit Molly was telling you about that was rented a month, those levels were incredibly high. Unlike anything that you would probably see with typical smoking, but they were very high, and that was probably a product of the number of people that were in the unit that were smoking meth. And that was one that we were dealing with because, to Molly's point, the residents were coming in and starting to say this. And so when we talk about the financial issues associated with this, it's not unlike every other multifamily complex in Longmont, in the sense of not only are they being burdened with the cost of remediation, they're also being burdened with the loss of revenue. And so when you start layering these things on, it has a significant impact. In addition to this, the other challenge that we faced in recent years is, can you find somebody to come in and do it? And so the time frames on getting remediation companies in are longer. And there's still some interesting time frames in terms of construction crews and when they can come in. If you need to replace air conditions and stoves and other things, then you're dealing with time frames there. So in some cases, when you go in the remediation process, you're dealing with the same pressures that everyone else is dealing with in terms of supply chain issues. So it is a multi-layered problem, and I would argue that probably the testing and the confirmation is obviously the easy piece. In some cases, the cleanup, but then if it's a complete gut, you start buying other problems. So it's hard to really assess what's an accurate time frame because it varies based on contamination levels.
I will add that we're also watching the industry just to see what comes out in the cleaning market, to see if, because I think in the past, before we knew a ton about what could effectively clean up meth, you get to reconstruction quicker. And what we're hoping to see and see signs of this coming out there with companies testing out new methods, that new cleaning methods can come up that are effective enough where you can avoid some of the reconstruction, but it's very early.
Yeah.
So this is where we just wanted to share the information that we are working with day to day, but we wanted to know what you all would like to discuss around this issue.
Councillor Hidalgo Faring, Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for putting this together and coming out to address this issue. Last year, Councilmember Yarborough and I were approached by a neighborhood who had and this is a single family home. So, in this discussion, a lot of what, solutions that we're addressing kind of go in line with the Housing Authority, and even possible solutions for multifamily homes. But, and then it sounded like, but I do want to circle back to neighborhood concerns first. But yeah, I had the list pulled up of recommendations that this particular neighborhood had brought forward to us. And it sounds like one of them being that the signage on the condemned home was visible from the street. Like, that's a practice that's already in place. Is that something that was fairly new, or is that a process? Yeah, come on up. Come on up. To understand why the house was condemned and, so for meth.
Were they concerned that it was visible?
So
or
that
it
was one
wasn't?
of the recommendations they had, that we implement that practice. So, but it sounds like that
We
is
do post
that
it
is
visibly,
a current
typically on the
practice.
very front door. I think I'm aware of the property you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
We posted it on the front
Okay,
of the garage.
okay.
It was
So
it was very visible when we
it's something
posted
that
it,
is
yeah.
common practice.
Yeah.
The other one is, and I don't know if, oops, I lost, my computer just decided to give out on me. But a database. I don't know if other states have incorporated this, or
CDPHE keeps
does have a database of meth homes.
Yes.
So that's something that residents can go to and see is there. So I really do want to focus on neighborhood concerns.
Okay.
I think, in looking at just one use of meth can cost, thousands of dollars to a home in damage. What about the effects to the neighbors, the people nearby who are, who are not engaged in that activity and are just innocent because, victim because the proximity. So I would like to further delve into that.
Sure. Do you mean the impacts on the neighbors of having to live next to a boarded
Next
up house?
to
or
not
next
well
to a
next
drug
to
house?
a drug house.
Yeah.
What can we do as a municipality to, what would be some of the best
Sure.
practices
I think
to address these issues?
Commander McDonald will probably speak to this better, but
Okay.
one of the most successful things they've done has been implementing testing as part of their investigations there. So they get warrants when they have enough indications of drug activity, and they have an actual certified consultant go in and do the test. And that's been the most successful way I'm aware of us getting those people out of the neighborhoods.
Okay.
And I can tell you, most of the time that we're there boarding them up, the neighbors are happy to see us boarding up that house.
Yeah, yes.
And they're thanking us, so, yeah.
Well, and I'm gonna, before Carrie comes up, I'm gonna dive into the question. Is it the neighborhood impact before they do their work and test, or is it the neighborhood impact after? Because there's two different pieces to this.
I think I turned off my mic and so I flipped it back on. It seems like it would be before. So
Okay.
as the activity is taking place, how to even, the neighbors know.
Yeah.
You know, but you don't have just cause to go into a house, so.
Yes, absolutely. Kerry McDonald. I'm now down in patrol, but for the year prior, I've been up in the special investigations unit with the Longmont Department of Public Safety, where primarily we handled large-scale narcotics cases, gang-related cases, things of that nature. And you're absolutely right. The impact on these homes have on the community are significant. As accurate as those numbers were, they're actually off in the number of warrants that we've served for swabs, because we served one today. that what drove us to that home was people in the neighborhood making calls, calling into the drug hotline, reporting the activity that they're seeing at the home, needles in the driveway. This residence was fairly close to a school, so obviously the residents there had some significant concerns, and this one's not unique. You can see that we increased them significantly last year. We did 14 as opposed to 6 the year prior. We're trying to take these as seriously as possible. As soon as we get these, we start to assign a detective to them to go out to start to work on the case. And then when we execute a search warrant, if we are able to obtain probable cause for a search warrant for narcotics, we generally, if we believe meth is in there, we have probable cause to believe meth is in there, we'll incorporate the testing for the meth-affected property as well. We have had significant findings with that. Oftentimes, their numbers are significantly higher than the minimal thresholds, and we've been useful in obtaining that evidence to help further child abuse charges and things like that in some of those properties.
Councilor Yarbrough.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know who will be able to respond to this. So, let's see, how do I word this? So I know we have property damage, which of course is very, very expensive. And neighborhood have, all the neighborhoods have a reason to be concerned, especially with kids in the neighborhoods or anyone, right? And so I guess when you all talked about the 1 month of the unit, and you turn around and here's another issue with meth, what services is public health providing for these people? Because they're leaving our units and going to another unit, which again, they're going around our community from one unit to another into neighborhoods and staying with maybe, couch surfing. And so what services are out there to support these people? Because it's evident that it's not ending anytime soon, and it's affecting our community and also affecting the properties of the housing authority, but mainly the person who is the people who are using the drugs. And so how do we, and I mean, you all may have figured it out already how to do it, but I guess for me, it's the person, because as well as our community, don't get me wrong, but it's the person. If they're moving around and within the city of Longmont, like I said, couch surfing, going into another unit, affecting that unit. We have landlords who, like you said, they're random people. May not be convicted felons. They may have an excellent credit, going into these units and destroying the units, and landlords have to pay for this. So how do we refer them to public health? Is there a program? If we know that these units have been affected from meth from the past tenant, is there something that we can report to public health so that these people can get some help? How do we get this under control for the person who's actually using the drug that is, going around in our community from unit to unit to unit, whether it's Longmont Housing Authority or the property owners? I know that was a long question.
That's a long question.
Sorry.
And there's multiple facets to this. I think I would say globally, when you look at what we're doing as an organization, and so, Zach can talk about LEAD and CORE and what they're doing to engage individuals, but again, the individuals have to be willing to lean into it, so I'll let him come up and talk about that. One of the challenges that we're seeing, and again, I think we've learned a lot in the different role with the housing authority here, and is that it all depends on how it's dealt with if there's an eviction and what that eviction process looks like. Because in an eviction, the eviction things can be suppressed. And if for some reason somebody's evicted because of meth use and these types of things. If it's suppressed, and in some cases, I think it's even as specific as the landlord has to ask that it's not suppressed. And if you don't ask that question, then it's automatically suppressed, which means that that information is not then put into the system that you utilize in the background checks for individuals. And so in the case of the housing authority, where this is actually occurring and we're in that process and we can do it, we ask that it's not suppressed. And the reason we do that is because we know we don't want to pass our problem on to other landlords. So there's pieces within the eviction process, and when you look at fair housing laws, they're very specific in terms of when and what you can do in terms of denying people the ability to lease. So you're managing that piece too. So that's a big piece of the puzzle in terms of that moving through our community. Sometimes they don't go to eviction because they will settle in different ways, and so then you never know about it. So there's an issue within the system in terms of getting that. You're just working through all these different mechanisms. What we're doing is asking for those situations to be unsuppressed so that another landlord can see it. That's part of the issue. I'll let Zach talk about what we're doing beyond that.
Mayor Peck, City Council Member Zach Artis, Public Safety Chief. Councilmember Yarborough, you ask a very complex question. Even though it's simple in what you ask, it's a lot to unpacking to do there. From the public safety standpoint, as Commander Carey had mentioned, when we go in this, we typically try to refer these individuals to some of the programs that we have. So we have some case managers on our lead that help folks with substance and alcohol abuse. There are multiple nonprofits across Colorado and within Longmont that will help folks. As you are already aware, addiction is a lifelong struggle. It's not something that you can go through a 12-step program and then all of a sudden your life is back to where it was before the addiction. And so again, it's trying to provide the resources, but oftentimes we don't have the ability to enforce or require that individual to attend whatever that treatment may be. One of the things that we also deal with a lot of times is some of these charges are misdemeanors. And so we've talked previously in years past that some of the legislation has changed. So the idea is not to jail or require, extensive things on the user, but actually go after the dealers. And that's a lot of what we're doing, is going after those dealers, which is a totally different conversation to have, because they're now looking at felony charges and jail time based on trying to get the product off the street is what we're trying to do. And so again, courts are limited in their resources also and what they can mandate individuals. Again, if it's a misdemeanor, we're going to write them a ticket and send them on their way for methamphetamines or cocaine or under a certain amount here in Colorado. So what I can tell you is, from public safety standpoint, when we do have interactions with individuals, whether we have stopped them for shoplifting, but we know they have a substance abuse problem, we are trying to connect them to services as quickly as possible, because we know that's the first step. But again, as the old saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so from public safety standpoint, not only are we trying to go after the individuals that are actually selling the product and distributing within our community, but we're also trying, with the limited resources that we have, to get individuals either plugged into relationships that are that we have, or either looking at nonprofits that we partner with to get them into either 12-step programs, into some type of housing. But again, as you know, those programs are very limited and they're very expensive to operate, and a lot of times your insurance may or may not cover. And a lot of folks that we deal with, unfortunately, don't have the insurance to cover that. And so again, it's a robust process that we have, but we are working to try to get the user the resources they need to make a lifestyle change. So I hope that answers your question, ma'am.
And then on top of that, council, thank you for approving some additional clinician positions that we're bringing in to work with our housing groups. And at the same time, council in your city council role, looking at the ARPA funding, but then also in your commissioner role, and looking at the funding where we were working with the Recovery Cafe. And so we've been working on the process. We're starting with our permanent supportive housing and bringing Recovery Cafe in to the suite, so that again, it's that providing a group to come in and work on recovery and staying in recovery with people in our housing units, And again, that's something that we're doing through the Housing Authority, but for the community, that's another group that's serving the broader community as well. Because when we look at these challenges and you compare it to the housing challenge we're having, you know, we know that one of the most important things in terms of stabilizing an individual is having stable housing. But unfortunately, this creates housing instability. And so that's the point of then partnering with the Recovery Cafe and in our permanent supportive housing, where we're really trying to provide that first stage of housing stability. So a lot of people are doing a lot of different things. I know that the Boulder County Public Health, they have different programs that they're working on. But I think at the end of the day, our biggest challenge is getting people in these situations to participate in these programs.
Oh, thank you. This is a lot to digest. I do want to make it really clear, though, because council and as housing commission, Longmont Housing Authority commissioners and staff, because they're working in Longmont Housing Authority, the presentation was on, a lot of it was on what's happening with the units that the city owns. But this does not in any way mean that because we are helping people on the lower income, that these are people that are, what are some of the things I've, getting help on, from welfare, on the city dime, etc. The meth problem is in different income brackets, it's in different housing units, it's by owners who've lived here for years and are now renting out their homes or have sold them. It is from people who own their homes and their children come in with friends. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that homeless people are bringing in our meth problems, or lower income folks are the ones that are causing the city all of these problems. It is not. It is just what we're most familiar with and we work with every day. So that's where our expertise came from the speakers.
I think if I can add to that, I can clearly say we've seen it at all income, and I'm looking to Sarah and Zach.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it at all income levels.
Right.
I mean, every demographic that you can think of, we've seen it. And in talking to our multifamily, or people who just do multifamily, market rate, even above market rate multifamily, they're dealing with the same issues. In this, you can't attribute it to any one component within our community. We're seeing it, all over. And and that's not, and I want to be clear, that's not unique to Longmont.
Oh, no.
As we talk to our partners in other communities, they're saying the same thing. As I talk to colleagues that I have in different places throughout the nation, they're saying the same thing. This is a problem that exists across the board. And, I would say when I talk to friends that are in pretty small communities, they're dealing with the same issue. So it's everywhere, and I think I'm glad you said that, because that's what we're seeing.
Yep. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. I think we all got our questions and concerns addressed. And thank you for all the work you do. She has one more. Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring.
Thank you, Mayor. So, no, it is going to be an ongoing conversation, and I did not expect that we would have, solutions tonight. But I think as situations come up, or even as, the state starts looking at bills for next year, we're going to have our dinner with our state legislators. What are some things that you think we as a council should be advocating for? If something comes to mind, you don't have to answer it tonight. But what should we be looking for, and really along the lines of best practice, in hoping, for me, it's neighborhood concerns. I mean, just the innocent victims because they just happen to live nearby, or even family members who have relatives or, who are addicted to meth. Just how can we support community?
So
So
you
something to
have a
think
whole
about.
year to think of those.
Yeah, and then get back to me.
I do have one idea that the meth task force amongst the Boulder County Public Health, the state, and public housing authorities are saying that there needs to be a pot of funding for remediation because there is no funding source out there for it. So that's one thing that's being talked about.
Thank you.
I have a lot of suggestions, but I'll wait until we're going to have that dinner. So thank you very much for your presentation and your time. We are now at the end of our agenda with mayor and council comments. Councilor Yarbrough.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I just couldn't leave without saying thank you all for being vulnerable. Thank you for the city being vulnerable in, showing our dirty laundry. But it's everywhere. And that's how we all grow when we learn from, other cities say, oh, the city of Longmont has this issue too. Like, we all know that this issue is everywhere. But I just want to say thank you. I know when we brought this up and asked for this information, you all were like, ugh. So you did it with excellence, and I'm not saying that just to say it. It meant a lot to me, and how you presented it, and how you all got this information and brought it to the community, and being vulnerable, but doing it with excellence. So that means a lot, and that just shows how great of staff that we have, and finding in our public safety. And so I just couldn't let tonight go without saying thank you for being vulnerable with excellence. And that may sound weird, but you all presented with excellence, and even though it hurt a little bit. So thank you.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you. Anyone else? City manager remarks?
No comments, Mayor, Council.
City attorney?
No comments, Mayor.
Can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. So all those in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. That passed unanimously.